Hello. So my name's Edgar, and my speaker series today is on the Uyghur ethnicity group and pretty much just life in America and life in China and what's currently happening right now. So first, I'm gonna get into some background and pretty much why I decided to do this speaker series for you guys all today. My entire family is Uyghur, and that means I've been constantly surrounded by the culture and ethnicity growing up. My dad moved to this country in 1993, and my mom quickly followed in 1994. My sister was born in 1997, and I came along in 2005. Growing up as a Uyghur in America, I've had strong ties to the Uyghur community, especially in Michigan. And although not recently due to the pandemic, I would often attend family friend gatherings and pretty much just celebrations of like the Uyghur community in our region. And this photo right here is just pretty much all the normal attendees. And then my mom is right here. And this is just some food. And this is my living room right here. And then we're just celebrating, just getting together. And I thought I'd share and spread some insight on the current situation of the Uyghurs and provide a personal connection to what's currently happening in China. Oh. So, first, I'd like to discuss who are the Uyghurs. So, pretty much, the Uyghurs are a separate ethnic group in China that live in the Xinjiang region, and they speak a separate language and they have a, a separate culture from the main area of China. And China is mostly associated with the Han Chinese, but it is actually comprised of, I think, around 60 different ethnicity groups. And the Uyghur ethnicity is part of that minority. And as you can see on this pie graph right here, uh, the Han Chinese take up a large portion of the ethnicity in China, around 92%. And then all the other smaller slicers are the different ethnicities, and the Uyghur ethnicity is right here at around 0.394%. So just a side-by-side comparison between the typical Han Chinese woman and a Uyghur woman on the right. She has a lighter complexion and then just all around different facial structure. And then once again, Uyghur man on the right, Han Chinese man on the left. Darker skin tone, a little bit more facial hair, different facial structure. So the Uyghurs practice Islam. So pretty much that means they avoid pork and they avoid alcohol and they pray daily. So I even have family in Dubai that are Uyghur, and Dubai is obviously a very Islamic country. And I got to visit the mosque there, and it was a really nice experience. And although me myself, I'm not religious, that I still practice the same stuff my parents did when they were growing up. They still raised me the same way. So I don't pray 5 times a day, but I do avoid pork and other traditional practices. So this is some Uyghur food that is common. On the left, this is called sunza, and it's pretty much just fried noodles and it's salted. I mean, I personally don't like it that much, but my parents make it all the time. On the right, this is naan. Pretty much, you just take dough and you take chopsticks, and that's where the little holes that are coming from. And the bread rises, and it creates this circular shape. Here's some more food. On the left, this is gashnan, which is pretty much meat pie. You get some ground beef, you get some veggies, and you put it in this bread, and then you cook it for a really long time, and it comes out like this. It's actually really nice. And then this is just a lekmen, which is handmade noodles with different veggies and meats and all that good stuff. And pretty much all this food was cooked by my mom in my own house. It's really nice, and we eat it quite often. So some standard Uyghur holidays, since they are Muslim, they do celebrate like the pretty popular Muslim holidays like Eid al-Fitr, sorry, which is just pretty much the end of Ramadan, which is the very long fast that Uyghurs take to pretty much show their gratefulness. And at the end, on this holiday, on this day, as you can see in the top right corner, many Uyghurs come together and they gather and they listen to traditional music. They have traditional foods and they just celebrate a good time. And then there's also Eid al-Hadha, which is a celebration of Ibrahim's sacrifice, and it's just another major Islamic holiday. Did I? Oh yeah, sorry, I skipped the slide. And uh, the Uyghur music is actually extremely distinct and very unique to the culture. And this is mostly due to like the traditional instruments and the tunes that are associated with the songs. So they have a really strong focus on string instruments and flute instruments. As you can see in the top right, that's a gajik, which is pretty much just, I guess, a Uyghur guitar, I guess you could say. And then a nai on the bottom, that's pretty much just a flute. And with the combination of these string instruments and these flute instruments, or these wind instruments, they come together to create these really rhythmic nature songs, and dances are associated with these songs that are like very melodic and a heavy emphasis on like hand movements. And here's a popular song, Uyghur song right now, that I'll show to all of you right now, which pretty much.
Lowe's is the new home for pros because after 100 years, we're working harder than ever to keep.
So like once again, obviously the heavy emphasis on the flute instruments and then the string in the background, and then. So yeah, it's pretty much just what most Uyghur music sounds like, and then there's singing. And pretty much all songs are just sang in the traditional Uyghur language. So now that I did a brief background of the culture of Uyghur Muslims, I'm going to go back to the history in China. So pretty much Uyghurs and traditional Uyghurs can date all the way back to 100 CE. And the ancient Uyghurs weren't actually Muslim, but Buddhist. And the Goturks ruled over the Uyghur people in this region right here. This was the Goturk Empire. And the Uyghur people resided around this region right here in the around northern part of China. And this is pretty much just an ancient depicting of what they would look like over the time. They resembled, don't really look like what they do now. Uyghur people would eventually rebel. The Uyghur people would eventually rebel, and along with their allies, they would overtake and capture the capital of Gochurk in 744 CE. And after that victory, they became a dominant player in the region of Mongolia, and they pretty much ruled for a really long time. So the Uyghurs established a Khaganate, which was ruled by the Khagan, or the leader, and the Khagan would often interfere with the Tang dynasty down in the southern part of China, and they would force themselves to resolve certain conflicts, and they would make lots of money, and that's how they got lots of their riches from this region. The Uyghur people also would take the silk from China and trade it with the Sogdians, which since the Sogdians were so intertwined with the Silk Road in China, they inherited a lot of their culture from the Sogdian people. They actually adapted their original Uyghur alphabet from the Sogdian one, and they even adopted the Sogdian religion, which is Manichaeism, which is the religion of Sogdians, which is pretty much just the constant war between good and evil. Not really God to worship, but more of a, I guess, ideology. So, describing more into the origins, during the 830s, the Uyghur Empire would eventually collapse due to famine and internal struggles with battle for power, and many Uyghurs would flee southward from the region, away from the collapsing nation. They would occupy two new regions, and they established the Kingdom of Kocho and the Gansho Uyghur Kingdom. The Ganshos were eventually destroyed, and their descendants, the Uyghurs, but with a Y, would remain in scarce number, and only 15,000 are actually left today and all across the world. And the Kocho Uyghurs were the only branch left, and they inhabit modern Xinjiang, and they would become the Uyghurs of today. So here's just a picture of, so this is where the previous empire, the Uyghur Empire, was. And then with its collapse, they fled southward more to modern day China. Two branches, one to the Kocho Empire, and then one, this is the Ganshos, which would eventually, the white area, which they would eventually die out, and the Uyghurs would be left with the Y. So the Kocho Empire right here in Xinjiang would eventually become the modern day Uyghurs that inhabit that region. So pretty much during the 14th and 15th century, the Kocho Empire would transition to Sunni Muslim as they were interacting with the Turkish people around them. The Chagatai language would which has mostly Turkish origins, would replace the old traditional Uyghur language during this period. And after many centuries, the cultural empire and the very changing nation of China, it would eventually become the modern Uyghurs. So Uyghurs in China actually managed to gain independence twice. Once in 1933, they established the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan in Kashgar, which is right here, this region right here. But it was completely, it was quickly recaptured by Chinese forces. I think it only lasted around 3 years. And then the second time, the Soviet Union backed Uyghur independence in this region over here. But when China transitioned to communism in 1945, the Soviet Union gave up that region and China quickly recaptured it again. So next I'm going to talk about life in China, and pretty much just after giving like a brief background of the culture and who the Uyghurs are, I'm going to talk about why it's so important to know about who they are. So currently, the Uyghur population, there are 11 million Uyghurs in the country of China. So majority of the Uyghurs, like I said, are in the country of Xinjiang, or I mean the region of Xinjiang, and a million more or so are scattered across the world in Central Asian countries, such as Turkey, which they has heavy influence on the Uyghur ethnicity, and only about 10 to 15 Uyghurs currently reside in America, as it is very difficult to leave the region with Chinese restrictions. So internment camps, which is really the major problem facing China right now, around 1 to 3 million Uyghurs. The number is so drastic and so like such a wide range because China's really trying to keep this whole thing a secret. They're not reporting on everything. It's just really just estimated numbers. They're currently being held in Chinese internment camps, and China's trying to hide this all up. But despite efforts with satellite imagery, we were able to identify already 85 camps in the Xinjiang region. And you can see here's just an image of one of the internment camps. These circled red circles pretty much just highlight watchtowers over pretty much like a jail with barbed wire is the yellow area. And in these camps, Uyghur people are abused and they're raped and they're tortured, and it's just a really horrible place. So I'm just going to get into that right now. So many Uyghurs are forced into labor in pretty much what is modern day slavery. And China is the number one exporter of cotton, and pretty much all of that cotton comes from the Xinjiang region, from these slaves, these Uyghur slaves that are forced to work on these cotton fields. And some notable brands that actually utilize the cheap cotton products are Nike, Puma, and Adidas. And now I have some videos to show Chinese efforts to actually hide this pretty much modern day slavery, as they understand its very bad image. So here I'll show. This is the actual Chinese ambassador getting shown proof of like Uyghur concentration camps and saying no, that is not what's happening right now.
This is almost certainly over northern China, over Xinjiang. Can you tell us what is happening here?
I cannot see, this video. This is not the first time you show me. I still remember last year you showed me what is happening in Xinjiang.
In Xinjiang, exactly.
But let me tell you this. Xinjiang, have you been to Xinjiang yourself?
No, I never have.
You know, Xinjiang is regarded as the most beautiful place in Xinjiang. There's a Chinese saying, you do not know how big China is.
Ambassador, that is not beautiful coverage, however, is it? Can I ask you why people are kneeling, blindfolded and shaven and being led to trains in modern China? Why? What is going on there?
I do not know where you get this videotape. You know, sometimes you have a transfer of prisons and prisoners, you know, in any country.
So, like, he's obviously lying. He's blatantly lying. Just he's saying that they're prisoners getting transferred to a like new prison cell. Like, what does that even mean? Like, they're trying to pretty much cover up, which is really horrible. And I actually have another video I want to show you guys. Right here is these are the Uyghur slaves. They're pretty much forced to pick the cotton, and they recorded them like dancing with the cotton that they picked to pretty much be like, oh, everything in the Xinjiang region. The Xinjiang region is so beautiful. It's so great over here. You have nothing to worry about. So like that's like, I mean, obviously it's just propaganda. They're trying to spread like the image that what's happening right now is not actually a bad thing. And one final video of Chinese propaganda.
This video shows Uyghurs speaking in Chinese, dressed up in traditional Chinese clothing, welcoming Chinese settlers to the Uyghur region. At the same time, they are singing red songs praising Chinese Communist Party at a time when the U.S. government, successive administrations declare that China is committing genocide against the Uyghur people and as well as crimes against humanity. All of these videos are from the Hotan prefecture and a couple of them from different Hotan counties. Hotan is a cultural center of the Uyghur people. This is a predominantly Uyghur area, more than 90%, and they're the traditional Uyghurs who keep Uyghur culture so well. For the Chinese government, on the one hand, they will use this Uyghur praise of the Chinese Communist Party to send a disinformation propaganda campaign to the world, saying, look, the Uyghurs are actually happy. They are grateful to the Chinese Communist Party. And on the other hand, they are basically sending the signal to the Chinese people. Look, they are finished. They don't speak their language. They no longer wear their costumes. They are one of us now. So you see the cultural genocide aspect through these videos. These are the significance of these videos.
So yeah, just pretty much they want to completely get rid of Uyghur culture, and they made a video. They're making videos and sending them to the public and trying to manipulate everyone. What's currently happening is with their support, and that they're actually really happy when in reality, obviously terrible things are going down. So, okay. So next I'm going to talk about Uyghur sterilization and the Chinese government's attempts to actually limit Uyghur population and pretty much limit its growth, and that's why Uyghurs numbers are so limited recently. So they force many Uyghur mothers to get sterilized, or they force many people to lose their ability to have kids, and many are forced to have abortions if they're found to be pregnant, and they do annual checkups on pregnant women and see if they have Uyghur kids that they're going to give birth to. And if they are found, like for instance, this mother right here, if they do have multiple kids, they are either ripped away from their kids or charged a large fine for having more than pretty much what is allowed, which is terrible. And to go further into the life in camps, so there have been reports of Uyghur Muslims being skinned alive in these camps. Uyghurs are raped, they're tortured. These internment camps are being rebranded as re-education centers, which the Chinese government is pretty much using to get rid of religion, get rid of this culture, and make everyone the same. But it's a concentration camp. It's not a re-education center. And despite all the evidence and all the proof of what's going on in this region, there's been little resistance to China's abuse, and they've just been pretty much doing whatever they please to this Uyghur people. And only recently has America actually declared what's going on. I think it was in 2020, only recently have they declared what's going on with the Uyghurs, actual genocide. So they completely violate their religion. So Uyghurs are forced to eat pork and denounce all their beliefs, denounce their belief in Allah, denounce their belief in Islam. They are not allowed to fast during Ramadan. They're not allowed to give their children Muslim names. They're not allowed to grow beards. They're not allowed to wear Islamic clothes. The Chinese government is pretty much trying to completely destroy and genocide, completely get rid of their entire culture, and it's an attack on human rights, pretty much. And even reports of organ harvesting, taking the lungs, kidneys, livers, hearts of living Uyghur people, killing them, and then taking their organs and giving them to other Chinese folk. It's just terrible what's happening right now. So I'm gonna go further into the statistics and just pretty much further proves all these claims that I've been making. So this is the births in China's Xinjiang region. The national average obviously stays the same. Then all of a sudden, huge dip, and this was the area with the Uyghur population where the Uyghurs are populated. And this is obviously due to the sterilization, the forced abortions, the pretty much the limiting of population growth, and then net added IUD placement per capita, which is an IUD is pretty much just a plastic strip that is put in the woman's uterus that prevents children. And as you can see, the national average is actually going down, while for some reason the Xinjiang region is spiking and it's always been super high, which just goes back to the point how they're trying to uh, limit the births. And one more graph of just sterilization rates in like in general in the Xinjiang region compared to the China. As you can see, huge step up in around the 2016 time period for all these graphs as China begins to start really limiting population growth of the Uyghur Muslims. So now I'm going to go into some personal stories involving my experience as a Uyghur or my family's experience being a Uyghur. So going into my parents' childhood, both my parents were born in China and weren't lucky like me to be born in America. So they faced many instances of discrimination. Mm, some notable ones are during the 10-year Cultural Revolution, my mom, which was pretty much the 10-year Cultural Revolution was pretty much a movement in China to eliminate all traditional ways. It was headed by Mao Zedong. And my mom had her father taken away from her at a very young age from 4 years, from 1968 to 1962, 72. She was without a father, only because he was sent to a remote region and he was pretty much taken away only because he was Uyghur. And he had a very prestigious role. He was a judge in the region, and stripped of his job, and he was taken to this remote location for 4 years where he was a laborer and he was pretty much a slave. And when he returned, he came back as a middle school teacher. He lost pretty much all his prestige, everything he worked for, just because of his ethnicity. And going further into my mom's childhood, her grandpa as well, going later back into history, was extremely well off. He had a large area, he had lots of money and lots of land. But the Chinese actually came in and said that if he did not give up his land to the Chinese officials, he would be killed. And he gave up his land, obviously, because he did not want to die. And then, for no reason at all, he was just thrown into jail for 8 months, solely because he had power in the region. And then my father as well. My father grew up in an extremely remote area of China. He was extremely poor. He grew up in a village, and his family was uneducated. And he was, I think, the first person to learn how to read and write and the first person to attend college in his family. And despite both their difficult origins, both my parents attended the same prestigious university where they met each other, the Dalian University of Technology, which is very impressive. So how they actually managed to come to America despite all the restrictions and uh, everything they had to deal with. So pretty much a lab professor from the University of Michigan traveled to China in seeking for a young Uyghur professor to take with them back to America. I guess it was more of a program to help the Uyghurs, as I guess back then there was still uh, efforts to try to help them. And my dad was pretty much the only one qualified enough to meet that position. So he was lucky enough to get the opportunity. However, pretty much, I think it was 2 weeks before he was allowed to go, the the professor that would take him home or take him to America died of a heart problem, and he was trapped in China for another year's period, and he did not know if he would actually be allowed to go back to America. But the program was reinstated, and my dad finally came to America a year later. And since my parents were married at that time, my mom was able to come in 1944, a year after that. So contact with family while in America, it is extremely limited. As I said previously, there are only 10 to 15,000 Uyghurs in America, meaning that pretty much majority, if not all, your family is going to be in China. So contact with your China is very limited. For instance, my mom can only actually have contact with her mother, and that is only because uh, my grandma has served the CCP for her pretty much her entire life. So she's very, even though it sounds messed up, she's privileged to even be able to talk with my mom. And they can never talk about politics. They can never talk about, oh, have you gotten the COVID vaccine? How is everything going on in there? Are the Uyghurs, what's happening with the Uyghurs? She can only ever ask, did you eat today? Do you feel well today? Are you okay? Nothing political, as all the recordings, all the calls that he has or that she has with her mother are being recorded and being monitored. And my grandma will actually be the one punished if anything is said against the Chinese government. And my dad, since he came from a very poor region, he actually has no idea what's currently happening with his family because they come from a very remote region. They don't really have technology. It's pretty much impossible to contact with his family, so he has no idea what is currently going on. And going back into that, my father recently actually went on a business trip to China. And since the Chinese government knew he was of Uyghur descent, he everyone else on his team was allowed, I think, like around like a 10-year visa or something. But he was only allowed, I think, a 2-week visa. So right after he finished the business trip, he was not allowed to stay in that country. They knew he was Uyghur, they knew he had family in the country, and he was pretty much kicked out of the country right when the business trip was over. And that's just discrimination. So wrapping up my presentation, I'm just going to talk about the change in China and pretty much the efforts being made to stop the mistreatment of Uyghurs in China. So there's the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act, or the Uyghur Bill, which is pretty much America's first attempt at recognizing what's going on in the internment camps and what's going on in China right now. It's pretty much requiring China to report on the abuse of Uyghurs, as they have been, like I showed you in the propaganda videos, they have been trying to hide it up. They've been trying to cover everything up. And this is just protests in front of the White House and advocacy for change and for, because what's happening right now is a modern day genocide. It is pretty much, it calls back to what happened within the Holocaust. It calls back to slavery. It is, but there's no efforts to really stop it until recently. And America, although it's not much, it's obviously a step in the right direction. And if you yourself want to make change in the world and help the Uyghurs, you can go to the SaveUyghur.org, which is just pretty much an organization that is founded on the goal of spreading awareness and eventually hoping to liberate the Uyghur people. And all donations contribute to the cause. So that has been my Uyghur presentation. Are there any questions?
Is the link from before, is it spelled with an I or a Y?
It's spelled with a spelled with an I. Yeah, SaveUyghur.org. Because there's two different spellings. It's Uyghur with a Y or Uyghur with an I.
Alright.
But if you just search up Uyghur donations, it should probably be the first link. All right. So thanks for attending my speaker series. I really hope there can be actual change in the future.
Thank you, Edgar. That was a really good presentation. And if you guys do have any questions, feel free to DM him in Discord or email. I don't really know. And yeah, I'm going to start recording right now.